Like, it's showing up in ways that I don't think, as Canadians we expected, and it's a greater problem than I think we ever expected. But let's take a step forward and not sort of wait for other organizations or government regulation to fix it. We all have a responsibility because we live in this great country with great privilege comes great responsibility, and I think that's what this is touching on.
We have systems that, in all honesty, have been created by men for the benefit of men in the early days of the country of colonization, and so therefore it doesn't include everyone. So that's why we have, the systems are set up in a way that there's always going to be this win and lose, whereas what we want to see by making sure that we're all included is where everybody wins and nobody gets left behind.
I think that the big piece is, like, so much of this comes down to what can happen at a local level. I've worked internationally. I've worked with really large organizations on large scale issues. But what it comes down to when you look at how to effectively make change in communities and in people's lives and those indicators, I mean, it's work that has to happen here. It's work that has to happen with the families that you know. It's work that has to happen with the people that you know. It's how you run your workplace. It's how you engage with your community. It's how your church, makes decisions. Like, all of those things are going to have a direct impact on these factors and a direct impact on people's lives. So
Hi, I'm Sue.
And I'm Heath.
Together, we've created the Backyards to Boardrooms video podcast series.
Why? Because our planet has a problem. It is not very sustainable.
Luckily, we've come up with a solution to help. On Backyards to Boardrooms, we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to highlight the work being done in our communities.
We chat with local leaders about causes such as sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. Backyards to Boardrooms,
where local action creates global impact. We've spent a lot of time, we've put a lot of effort into creating a really cool video podcast experience. I myself have been podcasting for about 5 years. Heath has been about a year. And this is both of our first video podcast efforts. So took some extra time to put our studio space together and figure out our audio and our tech. But here we are, episode 1 of Backyards to Boardrooms.
Yes, here we are.
So in this...
I need a drum kit. Do a drum roll.
This feels like a very dramatic introduction to have a drum roll to kick this off. But on another note, the topic of this first episode is the impact of poverty in our community. So we've brought in 3 amazing nonprofits, local organizations to talk about the issue from their different perspectives.
I learned a lot from these 3 guests. There are things I've known of all 3 of these organizations, but every time I speak with anyone from those organizations, I learn something new. Something I didn't know that they did or who they helped, and I just love that about this, because there are probably people out there that have never heard of any of these organizations before, and yet they'll be blown away to find out what they're doing in our community.
So the upcoming conversations you're about to hear are coming from Turning Points Collaborative, the Canadian Mental Health Association, and Archway Society for Domestic Peace. We asked them all the same 3 questions to uncover their perspectives on poverty in our community. Not just poverty, but also giving perspective on good health and well-being, on inequality and what that looks like in our community and how that impacts what we're doing. And
the cycles that those 3 things work in too, right? Because sometimes it's just a cycle of poverty, and it affects different people at different times in different ways. And I think that was what was really interesting, is discovering that it's not always what you think it is. on any of those three levels.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Hi, how's it going? Hi, everybody.
I was
Hi,
just saying
everyone.
hi to myself.
It's a good way to start your day.
Yeah. Here we are, episode 1, guest 1.
Yikes. Yay.
Here you are. Welcome, Lori. This is
Welcome,
Lori
Lori.
Case, for everybody who is with the Turning Points Collaborative organization here in Vernon, British Columbia. She's the director of communications for that organization, and she's going to help us figure out poverty and what that looks like in Vernon.
Yeah, figure out poverty.
Welcome.
That would be great, right?
Figure it
Maybe
out.
understand
Yeah,
Solve
it.
it. We're going to
figure it
solve
out.
it right now.
Step 1.
So, I know the question is, how do we define poverty in our community? And my answer to that is that I think poverty is defined here the same way it is anywhere in the world, any big city, small city. It's someone's inability to meet their basic needs. And unfortunately, we're seeing that in a country like Canada and in a city like Vernon. Unfortunately, poverty hits certain groups more than others, people with disabilities, Indigenous folks, minorities, people of color. And in our community, we're seeing seniors hit very hard right now, and single income families, single parent families, and primarily women. So I'd say that's how we define it here. And it's just that inability to meet your basic needs, which if we go back to the Maslow hierarchy of needs, it's shelter, food, clothing, those basic needs. But if you're on a fixed income, like a senior or maybe a single income family or a person with a disability, with inflation the way it is, with our housing crisis the way it is, those folks are impacted significantly more than a lot of other groups. So I'd say that's where we're kind of seeing the biggest increase in poverty right now. And poverty also isn't this visible thing all the time. We may look at homelessness and think that's poverty, and that's one piece of it. But I think there's a lot of families, a lot of individuals that are experiencing poverty that it's kind of hidden from us. It's someone accessing the food bank that you wouldn't know about. It's that kid going to school without a lunch in their backpack. It's a senior living in a fixed income who may be really isolated in their home space and not able to get out to get groceries or access the food bank, that sort of thing. So that's how I see it here in Vernon.
So coming from an organization like Turning Points Collaborative, I know that it used to be previously a bunch of different organizations that have come together to try to address a lot of these problems. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of give us a bit of a background of where Turning Points came from mm-hmm. and kind of what your mandate is now and how you're working towards solutions?
Yeah, our mandate changed 7 to 8 years ago when we realized that the organization wasn't really responding to the specific needs here. We started as a John Howard, and John Howard Society still exists throughout the Okanagan. That's great. Turning Points sort of adjusted our mandate to truly focus on housing and providing a housing continuum. So we provide a continuum of options. So everything from shelter to supportive housing, affordable housing, transitional housing, and then we also provide wraparound services to support folks within the housing, in addition to addiction recovery, which is a huge piece of it and is kind of part of this cycle that we want to respond to, and employment services as well. So that's where we fit in the community, and we are one of many service providers in this community who are responding to various aspects of poverty within Vernon. So that's a great thing about Vernon, is that we have this small community that's super connected, and we're all kind of coming to the table in various different ways on committees and meetings, events, that sort of thing, to try to meet the problem head on.
I think it's interesting that you brought up that poverty doesn't look the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. Even though for a lot of people, when you think of the word poverty, you have a certain image or a certain scenario that comes to mind. But also the solution isn't always it's not a fit for everybody. It's very different. It really depends on what you're coming into. Mm-hmm. And that's what Turning Points has, a very different level of entrance of where you can support people wherever they're at. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think we're seeing that gap, between the rich and the poor growing more and more. I think we've really noticed it in the last 5 to 10 years that gap has increased, and we're meeting the needs of people that were never, folks that we would service before. So those are the seniors, those are the families, those are the single income families, people with disabilities. And so for us, providing a continuum, and I think that's part of our growth, has been to meet the needs of anyone kind of entering into homelessness. And our goal obviously isn't to keep, how do I describe that? We want to provide all of the wraparound services and abilities, like provide tools and education to be able to move through a continuum, wherever you are in your housing journey.
Right.
So if you're in a transitional housing program with us, you're being given tools to help you get to long-term housing. That is our goal, is to move through the continuum so that ultimately you're landing in market housing or long-term affordable housing, and can maintain that housing, that you have everything you need to maintain that housing. The support, our outreach team will support folks in that housing so that they can really have everything they need to maintain it.
I liked when Mickey, when you came in and we were first chatting in the hallway, and you said you really loved the whole idea about this podcast. And what was it that hit you about it? What was the thing that you liked the most?
Well, first of all, the name, Backyards to Boardrooms, this means in community conversations, and just really relating the sustainability goals of the United Nations, which we often forget about, which we are, as a country, and we are obligated for. And I think people don't really understand that the issues that are affecting our communities are actually global issues. So it's a great way to kind of look at the world globally, but think locally. Like, what can we do at a local level? Because I think sometimes people don't want to think about those huge issues, because what do we do about it? What can I do about it as a person? But we can all do something, because we're all responsible, right?
Yes, we're going to get there in our conversation. That's exactly the purpose of Backyards to Boardrooms, is inspiring that community action. Looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that if you're looking even just on the United Nations website, it says everywhere that we're off track. COVID set us back huge. We are not on track to meet the 2030 agenda. They wanted to reach these goals by 2030, and they're not tracking the way that they want to. And so this is our way of pushing things forward, trying to make the world a better place. So let's start with our first question, Mickey. If you're looking at inequality, how does that connect to poverty? This episode is all about poverty, eradicating poverty, and what that means in communities. So how does inequality connect?
Well, it absolutely connects. Honestly, two of the biggest barriers to achieving equality for women is violence against women and poverty, and they go hand in hand. And we recognize that, when you look at the inequities in society, they impact different groups of people differently as well. And we know that, when there is a marriage breakdown, for example, women's overall income will be reduced by like 70%, whereas their male counterparts' disposable income will increase by 30%. So it's, when we look at, women are in the lower paying jobs, there's still, 20% less women, on average, women get paid than men. Access to childcare, education, employment, all of these things impact our ability to achieve equity in our society. So poverty, of course, also is created when women leave an abusive relationship, for example. They leave everything behind, often jobs as well. So they end up homeless, technically. The lack of affordable housing, and certainly it affects people at the lower income levels more so than those at the higher income levels.
And coming from the Archway Society for Domestic Peace, I should have said that up front. This is where you're coming from, but this is where your perspective comes from, right? So can you give us a little bit more background on that?
Well, at Archway, of course, we support survivors of domestic and sexual violence to live their lives with dignity and respect. We are all about creating a just society for everyone and a world free from violence. And poverty, of course, is one of those barriers to getting there. We have kind of a wraparound support. So we have our transition house, which is sort of the immediate shelter. We have kind of a second stage for young moms between 15 and 24, although we go up higher, where they can stay for 24 up to 2 years. With an affordable rent as part of that. We have rental supplements through our homeless prevention program. We have counseling programs. We have, child and youth. We just have a number of programs. Outreach, which provides mobility support. So transportation in the North Okanagan can be pretty difficult. Looking at where those who are lower income level, they live in sort of more the rural areas, which can also be a greater risk for them because they can be more isolated, but at the same time, it's easier for them to find rents they can afford. So having the outreach support is also really important. So those are just some of the things we do.
And that's your role, actually, because you're the ED of programs, right? Executive Director of Programming. So how many programs are actually running in Archway now? I mean, it's grown.
Yeah, so we have 17 programs in 6 different locations. We have, victim service programs, and that supports survivors coming through the court system. Our outreach worker helps people through the family law system. We have our child and youth advocacy center, and that's where when there's disclosures of sexual abuse, it's kind of like a case managed with RCMP, CFD, in a family-friendly environment, being able to do the interviews and support the families through that process. What am I missing? Counseling programs, children's counseling, women's counseling programs, sexual assault services, sexual assault counseling. We're also on track soon, I hope, for second stage housing, which we have been, let's say it's been on the table since 2018, and then of course COVID hit and that put us back again. So hopefully within the next couple of years we're going to have some second stage as well.
Men's programs too.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. That's one thing that I guess I should clarify is that our programs, our victim service programs, are also there's for survivors, which includes male survivors as well. Our sexual assault counseling also does. So it's good to have those as a service as well. And, there's the Family Resource Center also has counseling for men as well.
I never thought of, just going back a little bit to the idea of transportation. I never thought of that as an issue that would feed into this topic, but you're right in that, people living further out in rural, is it the right one? Rural.
Yeah.
Rural.
It's a difficult word to say as well. Rural areas. It's less expensive, sure, to live out there, but you don't have access to amenities like transportation.
Or jobs.
Yeah.
Right.
Hard to get. There's less jobs in the rural communities as well. So.
And there's some areas, believe it or not, that don't have cell service.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I believe it, for sure.
Right. I believe it. Yeah.
Especially in the North
Cell
Okanagan.
service here, depending on what system you're on.
Depending on where you are in
Where you
the
are.
town.
Yeah, who you're with.
But that's the great thing about Vernon. I mean, we're small, but we're small enough that you do have access to collaborations to other organizations, and this is a conversation we've been having.
That's a great segue, because I was going to ask about, is this type of programming unique to Vernon? Is there something special about what you're doing in Vernon as opposed to other smaller communities? I mean, we're considered a smaller community, even though we are a city. 80,000, I think, is our
greater Vernon,
Vernon population base. But is this kind of program unique to Vernon in the sense of the scale and the scope and the reach that you have?
Well, the fact that we're kind of the only sort of women's serving organization, like specific to women's issues right now, and so pretty much if there is a program that we need, we know that there isn't anybody else doing it, so we need to look at how to do that. But it is the one thing I like about Vernon, because I actually have worked in the entire Okanagan, in Penticton, and I was years in Kelowna. And one of the really great things about Vernon is that it is very collaborative. And I think that maybe because it is a smaller community, it does have fewer organizations, but those organizations do more. And we do more together as well. So we're always looking at ways to partner because we're working with the same people, really.
Right.
Well, that collaboration, that connection is so important when you're looking at not reinventing the wheel, right? How do we solve this problem? Let's do it together. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. So we have Julia here with us from the Canadian Mental Health Association here in Vernon.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, great.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do at CMHA, Julia, and why it's important for you?
Yeah, so CMHA Vernon, we're a multi-service agency. We focus on lots of different things that impact people's mental health. So everything from housing to crisis line services to education to employment. We run recreation programs. So, I mean, it's a full spectrum. Canadian Mental Health Associations, we work on a belief of like what's needed as a framework of support for people. So when it comes to mental health and healing, it takes a lot of different facets of our lives. So that's why we work in lots of different areas. So it's a great organization to get to work with. I'm very lucky to get to work with these folks. We're doing a lot of work with youth right now. And more and more work kind of in prevention and early intervention, which is great.
And I think that concept or that topic of prevention and early intervention is why we thought CMHC would be a great guest for this first episode talking about poverty or eradicating poverty.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And connecting it from...
Throwing it to you.
And connecting at a local level or at a level where, the average citizen can understand what role they play in this, especially when we're thinking about how decisions made here in Vernon can have impact on the global stage and be contributing to those United Nations goals that have been set out for the globe, right? It's not just for people who are making decisions at high levels in government and organizations around the world. It's actually happening right here in our backyards, hence backyards of boardrooms.
The ways we feed into the larger policy questions are so critical, but the work has to happen on the ground or those policy decisions don't go anywhere.
Right.
Local action for global change.
Absolutely.
So how do you see mental health intersecting with poverty?
On a broad picture, so everyone has mental health. So mental health is the same as physical health. We all have mental health, and the degree to which it may be injured or that we may be dealing with an illness is variable, again, kind of like your physical health. And with our mental health, everyone has it and everyone can be affected by it. But much like physical health, poverty is going to impact not only some likelihoods of acquiring illness, but it's also going to greatly impact your ability to heal. So if we really draw it up against physical health and how we think about that, we can see those parallels. It's going to impact how much illness you might come up against, and then how strong your recovery or how long your recovery might take or your access to recovery.
And I just had a light bulb moment. Here I was thinking one directional, not a parallel impact, like mental health impacting poverty or poverty impacting your mental health.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I know
It's
that,
true.
but the way that you said it really just set off that light bulb for me. So thank you for that.
All
And
right.
it
Well, I'm
depends on-
done here. So
There you go.
Mic drop.
And-
Mic drop. But it depends on your perspective in the moment, right? It depends on where you're at any given moment in life. I mean, we've all gone through, challenges in our lives, and like you said, Julia, like where we're at with how we're able to cope with our situation is exactly mental health. Yeah, and we all experience it. You're right.
We all do. And again, kind of like our physical health. So, you know, with your physical health, you've got nutritious food, you've got regular exercise, you've got clean air, clean water, you can sleep at night, all of those things. If those things are happening for you, there's a certain amount that your immune system, right? Your buffers. You've got
Right.
buffers against illnesses. And likewise with your mental health, you know, if you've got like good, strong family, social supports, like a job that you enjoy, all of those pieces and stability, then, and this is something that became really clear during COVID, was when we lose some of those protective factors, we quickly become much more susceptible to anxiety, to depression, to these different things that can really have an ongoing impact. And so during COVID, we lost a bunch of those support factors. Suddenly we weren't going to book club or going to the gym or, you know, all these different interactions that we were used to. And everyone suddenly was like, wow, my mental health is so much more vulnerable right now. I'm so much more like I'm more likely to become susceptible to some of these things. When we put those things back in, it gets easier. So likewise with poverty and resources, if you don't have access to resources, then your stress level is up, your sleep is down, your nutrition is down. You don't have time to do all these things that take care of your health. Like you don't have time to go to the gym, or you don't have the resources to go to the gym. So if all of those things are going on, that's just a very small snapshot of what resource access does to your resiliency. And so at a certain point, just having that protection is going to impact how likely you are to have to deal with an illness.
Well, living in survival mode is not sustainable.
No.
You cannot live in survival mode day to day, hour after hour. Something's gonna go.
Well, and if you think about just stress, like if we just, I keep hitting your microphone. I'm sorry, I'm going to damage all your equipment because I talk with my hands, and then
We should put a brighter bubble on it, maybe.
or just give me fidgets for during the podcast.
Right.
So if you think about stress, right, and like, okay, doing a podcast recording, like that's stressful. That's a stressful thing. What I'm saying right now is getting recorded. So, you know, everything gets a bit amped up in my system, and I've got some adrenaline, and that's great. That's going to help me. That's going to get me through this. It's going to give me the energy to do this. But what do we know about stress? We have to recover, right? So we go through something that's a little stressful, and then we're like, oh, I'm going to go relax. I'm going to go sit down and have a glass of water and maybe go for a walk and work out this adrenaline and excitement. If you're in a constant state of stress, so if there's constantly things coming at you that you're not resourced to deal with, or right, that you don't have the capacity to respond to, and your stress goes up and up and up, that's where we literally see the break. And that's where, you know, all of the charts, if you look at charts that say like, show me the stress chart, you get up there, and if you don't get to come down from that stress, that's where illness gets in. And that's where it starts to cause dysfunction. So just on a basic point, we can see, yes, stress is okay. It helps us in our lives. But if it's constant, it causes illness.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we do, so again, it's really diverse. One of our newer programs that we're so pleased to be working on, especially because of how it impacts poverty. So one of the things that I think is really important when we talk about poverty is to understand how it's not just that you have less money, but you have more likelihood of being impacted by different things. So we have a lot of folks in our community who rent, and it's a very common thing for families and individuals to be renting. And one of the things that we found out through COVID was just there was a high level of vulnerability in a lot of our renting families. You know, the moment people were off work for one paycheck, we saw a huge increase in food insecurity, and access to other programs kind of shot right up. And I think that what we don't always see around issues with poverty is it's not just that you're renting and that you've got to deal with the precarity of that. There can be other pieces like there's a sudden bill, there's a sudden cost to your family. And I used this analogy the other day because it makes sense, and I've gone through it a number of times. Your kids come home with head lice, right? Your kids come home with head lice. They like to share hats. I don't know why, but they love it. It's the favorite thing. It's like, oh, let's wear my hat. So your kids come home from, after school care, from school, they've got head lice. And that's a stressful thing, right? How many people have dealt with pulling nits out of their kids? Yeah, it's awful. It is. And you're washing all their bedding, and like all of that has to happen. Now, let's look at what actually happens around that. Do you have in-suite laundry? Because if you have in-suite laundry, thank goodness, you're throwing everything right into that washer. You're hot. You're good. Okay, maybe not. Maybe it's in the building. Okay, you're hauling everything down. You're hoping to get in. You don't want your neighbors to see that you're trying to wash out your bedding because you don't want to be like head lice mom that day. Worse yet, you don't have laundry in your building. You're trying to get to a laundromat. Right? So now you've got to get away from your kids. Someone's got to watch the kids. You've got to bring the kids with you. Super stressful. What else are you doing? You're going down to the store and you are buying head lice medication or the shampoos. Okay, $50. Just like that. It's $50. So it's $50 for the head lice shampoo. You got $50 for the laundry to do. Let's just say you got $100. If you are working on a budget where you don't have that excess, where you don't have $100 to just throw at your kids sharing hats while they're at school, what are you going to do with that? So it's not just all these different factors around your situation that's going to cause you extra stress, but your ability to access more money, your ability to access credit might not be there. And if you're not able to access credit really quickly, what are you going to do? How are you going to go get money? Well, you're going to either use your credit card, which you may not be able to pay off, and then all of a sudden you're at 27% interest, or you're going to go to check cashing. You're going to go to short-term loan. And I don't know if you've ever looked at the rates that you're paying on short-term loans, but they're very high. And let's be really clear. I'm in a position in my life where I can access credit almost for free. Right? You get to a certain point where you've had a job and you're doing your things and they just throw credit at you. But it's different, right? It's different when you're actually somewhat comfortable. You can get credit cheaper than when it's not. So when you're struggling and all of a sudden your only options are so high in user fees that the likelihood that's going to start to compound. So we have encountered, and there's tons of studies out about people who hit short-term financial crisis. Something as simple as head lice, and they don't have the cash and they have to use credit. And when they use that credit, they incur huge fees. So are they paying that credit back next month? No, they're putting some against it, but it often becomes a cycle. This is a very long story to say. We really wanted, and we're so happy to be able to operate the rent bank. So we operate a rent bank for North Okanagan. The first year that we started a couple years back, we were talking to Rent Bank BC and working this all out, and they're like, we think $30,000. We think that's how much you need in loan capital for the year. Well, the first full year we operated it, we were at $80,000. We issued $80,000 worth of loans to the community so that people could keep their housing or pay their utility deposit or pay a security deposit, all of these little pieces that cost money, but that disproportionately impact you if you're dealing with a constrained financial budget.
I think that's amazing. There's so much support in this community.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you say where the funding came from
So for the rent bank, we get some money from the province to operate it, but our capital, we actually raise about $30,000 a year in community for that. And we've been raising that the last few years by doing coldest night of the year. So we do that in February, and people come together and they raise money and they have teams, and we say, like, this is about community, keeping community housed. And so that's been how the communities come together to support that work.
And I love the analogy of coldest night of the year, because it is, I've done it. It is cold in February when you're walking outside raising money. It's cold.
Yeah.
But it really gives you an idea of, like, if people don't have a roof over their head or if they're struggling to keep the heat on, it's cold outside.
Well, and I think that in our community in particular, we have people who are visibly homeless, and we have people who are our hidden homeless populations as well. The Rent Bank is a program where we hear from a lot of people who are couch surfing. Right, so they're staying at someone's home, often with kids. We hear from people actually where parents are separated from their kids because they can't all stay with the same family members. So they've had to split up to find shelter, and you know, it's going to be hidden because people are going to do their best. They're going to do everything they can. But we have to make sure that those families are becoming securely housed again, because otherwise that next step is on the street.
I'm really glad you used that example, Julia, because it is relatable to so many people. I mean, poverty, there's stigmas where it's like poverty is people who sleep on the street.
Yeah.
But that's a really delicate balance in some families. I grew up in a single mom home, and it was a delicate balance. There were days, weeks, sometimes months you went without, and I would never have even considered what my mom was going through in that time till this recording, is that she was really balancing some heavy burdens, through that time frame. And so there's a lot of people out there that are in very similar situations or have been in those situations and can totally relate to what you talked about. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's not always obvious.
No, and I think that the more, especially when we talk about kind of that hidden housing precarious situation, when you think about your coworkers, when you think about if you're an employer, when you think about the employees you work with, when you think about these challenges, like it's so hard to understand how hard people might be working to keep it all going.
Okay, so that was amazing. I don't know about you, but I learned more about what those organizations do. And I've never met Julia before. I've met Mickey and Lori. Always enjoy talking to them, but I've never met Julia, and that was a pleasure. So I'm very excited to have had that episode come out. I think you guys are going to get a lot out of it.
Heath, I completely agree. It was incredible. I learned a lot. Also really impressed with their ability to speak into a microphone with a camera in their face. They're a lot more relaxed than I was expecting. So really kudos to them. That was awesome. We've got a little bit more in this episode to share with you. Something that's really like the purpose of Backyards to Boardrooms is community action. How can the community take part in the solution to eradicating poverty? So coming up next, we've got all three of our guests talking about how the community can help. I have a question that kind of might shift perspective a little bit, but I think there's a piece that's also impacted is the people that work for and with and around turning points. Mm-hmm. How does it impact you as an individual to be helping families looking outward from Turning Points Collaborative?
Mm-hmm. It's such a great question, because I just think our team is so incredible. By no means, I'm here and I am not the expert. I am, I always say I am sort of one foot removed from it. And my job as the director of communications is to really showcase the work that they do, because they are the experts. They're the boots on the ground on the front line, and they're seeing challenges every day that are life-changing for them, but they also get to see the wins, and those wins are life-changing as well. So I've heard someone say that, working at the shelter just gives them the opportunity to be someone's someone, because these are folks that have been disconnected from their natural support system, from their families, from their community maybe. And that looks different every day. And sometimes the win is simply they got out of bed today. Sometimes the win is they learned how to do their laundry today. Sometimes the win is actually getting to get them home again. And that's a big piece of what we're trying to do, is help folks make those connections back to their natural support system. That's part of the impact. The downside is we're also living in an opioid epidemic. And so our staff are seeing overdose and death at a rate that they shouldn't have to. That's not what you sign up for when you're thinking I'm going to be a residence worker at the shelter. So they're impacted in a dramatic way. Yeah.
It's incredible. And I can't imagine how tough it must be to do a job like that. And so thank you, first of all.
Thank them.
Let's thank you to everyone at Turning Points Collaborative.
Yeah.
But it leads really nicely into community support. How can the community help? How can the community be part of a solution?
Well, like I was saying, I think our community is in such a great position due to its size to really foster terrific collaborations. And I think many organizations are doing that already. So from somebody maybe outside of those individual service providers, someone's looking to volunteer or get involved, I think that's the message, is just get involved. Find an organization that speaks to you, find a cause that speaks to you, and reach out. That's the other great part about being in a small community. The organizations are generally really accessible. So find something that makes sense to you and look for ways that you can, if you can't contribute financially, and understand that's a barrier for a lot of people, but you have time. Time is such a great resource to offer an organization, whether it's volunteering or providing, maybe you have professional services that you can provide. I met Heath through exactly that reason, providing a professional service to Turning Points. That was a massive win, that we can take that service, and that's money now left on the table to put towards programming instead of towards marketing, right? So anything you can do that, if you're an accountant, that's a great thing. Marketing, that's incredibly helpful to a nonprofit. So I would say just get involved and educate yourself. And
building stuff.
Yeah.
Cleaning stuff.
Exactly.
Like anything. You don't even have to have a specific skill set, but just that you're willing to put your hands in and do some work.
But the great thing about that is the moment you get involved, you learn. So you may think you know something about homelessness or addiction or mental health or, the women's recovery space. But until you get involved, that's the best place to educate yourself and get more information. And once you do, then you start talking about it more with your greater community, with your family, with your friends, your circle. That's how we move the needle, I think. And
you make a connection with other people,
either
other people in the organization, or you're making a connection with somebody who's actually having those lived experiences, right?
Yeah.
It'll change your perspective.
When we're connected to our circle, that's when life change can happen. When you're isolated and you don't have support system, mental health comes into play. It's all interconnected.
Over and above anything else, poverty is the number one issue around the world. People living, the United Nations says it's people living below $1.25 a day, but it's global. And we're not going to change the whole world, but this podcast is about figuring out how to take local action and creating that ripple effect outward so that we can make this world a better place.
Well, you guys have done that. I think you've taken a step yourself, and we're asking how the community can get involved. You're starting that by simply having this podcast, and that's one step towards it, because you're going to create greater awareness. And I just have an anecdote that I kind of want to bring up, because I think it is really relevant to your podcast and what we're talking about. But I was in Cambodia doing a film shoot many years ago with the director of an organization that was an international development agency, so providing food, water, shelter, and finding ways for solutions for folks. And we were in Cambodia with this very impoverished family. And I looked at him and I said, how do you keep going? Because the problem is so big. Like, this is just one family in one country in this entire world, and there's so much poverty going on. And I always say it's a core memory for me, because he sort of stopped me in my tracks and said, just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you shouldn't do something. And I think that comes back to our core message with your podcast here, is to make that message out to the community, like, find a way to do something. Big or small, every little bit counts. So get involved.
Yeah. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Great quote.
Thank you, Lori. That was great.
Yeah.
What can I do? What can our community do?
Investing, I mean, one of the things the community is really good about is investing in organizations like ours and the work that we do, which is really important. But I think on a day-to-day basis, people don't always think about the issues. And so there's little things we can do, like, well, one of the things we can do is be a little less judgmental about those that are in our community and don't have as much as others. And we do need to focus, in order to create a fair, just, equal society for everyone, we kind of have to focus on the most marginalized, because, I mean, this idea that we focus on the middle class, and we can do that, but then we still have these people that we have to lift up. So if we can start there, then we all get lifted by that. We need things like a living wage. And I know our community is pretty populated with small business, family-owned businesses. And so there's a lot of businesses locally that say, well, like, a living wage is $19.40, I think, now for Vernon. And that's just covers your basic necessities. And a lot of businesses are like, I can't really, I'm struggling paying the minimum wage, never mind a larger one. But there are other things we could do, like, for example, access to childcare is really important in order for people to be able to work outside the home and have gainful employment. So maybe smaller businesses could get together and be able to kind of provide childcare for their workers. I mean, there's ways, I mean, as not-for-profits, we work collaboratively. Maybe the business community can do that as well. I think it's really important to support your local businesses. One of the things that we participate in is the Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which is a provincially funded program.
I just saw that last week when I was at the farmers market, and I was like, I'm emailing myself right now. I need to mark this down. It's like, how many years has it been in the works, this program? But bringing it to people's attention, right?
Yeah,
and
it's
so cool.
It is really important, because on so many levels, like, it supports the local farmers, it supports families, like families and low-income seniors. There isn't enough. Like, I think the province has increased the funding to it, but I encourage every organization that's working with lower-income populations to apply, because the more we use it, the more that it's identified. And I think certainly writing letters to the province, commending them on the program, because it hits so many things, with it being local, with supporting families, with nutrition. I mean, it's just,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's a very simple program too.
Very simple. And I love that idea of writing letters to the province in support of it, because then maybe more support will come. You're talking about low income and the minimum wage, or what was the 1940?
1940 is what a living wage would be. So in order for a person to, like, be able to pay for basic necessities, they need to make at least 1940 an hour.
So the United Nations, the number that United Nations has out is $1.25 a day. That's the poverty line that they have. It's so low. Yeah. But there are places in the world where that's you know, that I can't hear, there's no words. But that's the poverty line that they're working with. And so being in a place like the Okanagan, it's expensive to live here. Mm-hmm. Therefore, making that gap even larger, even more difficult to live.
And that's the thing with the living wage, because it's different depending on where you live. But yeah, I saw that $1.25 and I thought, that can't be right. But then it does make sense if we're looking globally, right?
And then you're also talking about standard of life and standard of living, and what is available in those countries where it's $1.25. What are the living conditions as well, too, right? I mean, they're probably a lot different than what people are getting.
It does come back really nicely to inequality, right? And trying to raise the bar so that we're helping rising tide raises all boats. That kind of a concept where when we find equality, the whole world will be better.
That's right. Until all of us, well, none of us, right? Like, I mean, the reality is
Right.
is that inequality is at the root of all of it. Without, we have to achieve equality and equity at every level in order for there to be a fair, just, equal society, and a society where we can all have a sustainable living. Because that's what we're talking about, is sustainability. So,
Right.
Yep. It's beautiful.
I think we don't talk enough about how close it is for a lot of us and for a lot of people in our community.
Yep.
That's a great segue, I think, into talking about community action. So we really want to finish off this conversation with bringing the community in. What can the community do to help? Short of, participating in Coldest Night of the Year and talking about
that's
it.
a good start.
Yeah, so I think there's so many different levels. Like you've said, we talked about high-level policy pieces. Take part in high-level policy pieces. Get involved with an issue you care about. Learn about it. Find an organization working on things you care about that does policy work, and get engaged. And then talk about with people. And then when as you kind of break down more and more to the local level, look for the organizations in your community doing work that you support, and find out what they can do or what you can do to work with them. And of course, Coldest Night of the Year, or Ride Don't Hide, and that supports our youth work. Just go find an organization and sign up as a monthly donor. Just be like, I'm going to give you money every month. You don't have to throw an event. You don't have to do anything. Just here's some money every month. If you can do it, that's a great relief for organizations. One of the things that we talked about, especially during COVID and during different emergencies, one of the things that actually helps our mental health in any time of crisis or any difficult time, something you can do for yourself is help others. And it's actually a great tool to use with your kids too. So, we haven't had a really hard wildfire season in Vernon. It's not
This year.
This year. This year, yeah.
This year.
Just this year.
So if we think about last year, there was a lot of people last year were asking, what can we do with the wildfires? It's causing me stress. It's causing my children stress. We're not even on alert. We're not even evacuated, but it's causing stress. And one of the things you can do to reduce stress and to regain a sense of control in these situations is you can find a way to help. So if it's smoky, go find your neighbor who's older or who might have lung problems and say, hey, I know it's really bad out. Do you need a ride anywhere? Do you need a drive? Do you want to come over for tea? Can we visit? Can we have a social interaction? That's a great thing for you and for them. Individual actions, and the more that people can work together to take care of the people around them is really meaningful. Being a part of your school's parent advisory council and saying, like, how do we make sure we have enough money that every kid's going on a field trip? How do we make sure we have money for meal programs? How do we make sure, look for ways to wrap around each other and to wrap around the people you need. And when you need help, let people know and let them wrap around you, because then they know they've got permission.
It's a really great spot because you made a lot of points that brought to light so many of the sustainable development goals, right down to climate action, decent work and economic growth, education, even helping kids in school. Mental health permeates everything. And I think a great spot to finish off is making sure that you're taking care of yourself too, regardless of because there's an element of shame. And I'm familiar with shame and vulnerability. But if you can get past that and reach out for help, then I think that's where people will recognize it and maybe do the same.
The more open you are to say, you know what, this is something I've dealt with. Like, I talk about it all the time. I'm like, yeah, generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, postpartum. Like, talk to me about the many times that I've had to work so hard to heal, because it means other people realize they have permission. So you got to be that light post, right? You got to be the person willing to say, yeah, we go through this and we heal and we're going to be better, and you will be too.
You will too. Wow. Great advice for all of us.
Wow. I'm speechless. Coming to the end of all three of those recordings, listening back, uncovering talking about poverty, talking about hidden poverty, talking about how we can contribute to solving the problem. I said I'm speechless and I'm saying a lot of words, but it's...
I get it. It's incredible. Like, I mean, it is, I like what Lori said about this being almost a perfect size city, is that you've got a lot of these organizations who are very accessible. They all need support. They give us great suggestions on how anyone in Vernon can get involved, find a cause, get connected, and contribute. That's all. As little or as big as you want.
And as the city of Vernon is big enough to have organizations like that, but also small enough that they can collaborate with each other and bring help in from the community. So awesome. I can't wait for episode 2.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be awesome.
We're going to learn a lot more stuff. And
do we leak out what it is?
Yeah, I guess we could. Episode 2 coming soon. Episode 2, it does not have a title yet.
Inclusive institutions?
Yes. Episode 2, we're going to be talking about...
It's a working title.
Yeah, inclusivity and the institutions in Vernon, just like we were talking about in this one, with a slightly different perspective. So stay tuned for episode 2. Thanks for listening to Backyards to Boardrooms.
Don't forget to subscribe, and all the links to the cool things you learned are down in the notes below.
Bye!
Bye!